stock, I guess, whatever you want to say. And the Aborigines are either O or A. That's kind of interesting. No B or AB, but you can see for the rest of us, there's Native Americans, very few ABs. So, but you can see for the rest of us, it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't know why. But. Okay, so WBCs, they're also important to understand. They're also called leukocytes. They're actually present in the blood in a very small number. They're there, however, for a very important job, to protect us against disease. We'll talk about it just briefly tonight, and you'll get more, we'll talk a little bit more about the lymphatic system, and you take micro, you'll get more about it. But, I have to do this, I'll do this tonight. What I usually do in this unit is I set up and leave set up for the entire, 4 nights, 5 microscopes. And I put on each microscope a specific, the pointer on a specific type of white blood cell, rather than have you guys find neutrophils or monocytes or basophils or whatever. I do it for you, and I just set them as demos. But white blood cells are divided into 2 groups based on their appearance under a microscope. They're either grainy looking, so they're called granulocytes, or they don't look grainy looking, and they're called agranulocytes. Pretty simple. The way they're divided up is this. The granular looking white blood cells, by far and away, the most numerous white blood cell is a cell called a neutrophil. In my micro class, a couple of semesters, I did, I had my students actually stick themselves and, a drop of blood on a slide, and we stained white blood cells. And it's really, really, really easy to see the different types of white blood cells. The most common type, if you counted 100 cells, over half of them would be neutrophils, and they're really easy to tell from anything else. And these are really, 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 really important cells because they engulf invading bacteria. This word here means cell eating. And these cells go out, seek out, and destroy infective agents in our blood. Right? And so these are really critically important, and that's the reason there are such large numbers in the body. They're really easy to tell. Eosinophils are also they're kind of a cell. They're sort of an eating cell, but they're not all that hungry. They're fairly rare in blood. If you look at 100 cells, you might see 2 or 3. Yeah, thanks.
Is that why different people's immune system is stronger and weaker because they have a higher count of neutrophils?
I'm sure that has something to do with it, yes. Because a person who is under attack from an infection is going to have a higher percentage of these infection-fighting cells. If you're, say you don't have such a strong immune system, or you have various white blood cell abnormalities, then maybe you are more prone to infection. So these numbers, the higher, to a certain extent, the higher the better, but nothing, you wouldn't want to have too many, because that could be a problem. Basophils, when I'm setting up the microscopes, man, I have to really search for these guys. They're hard to find. It's like none. I mean, I usually find 1 or 2 on a slide. But these guys are nasty because if you ever have allergies, like I do, they're full of histamine, and they release this when you have an allergy attack. So basophils are not engulfing cells, they're not eating cells, right? But because they contain histamine, they cause inflammatory reactions, which are defensive reactions in the human body. You learn more about this when you take micro. So these are the ones that are grainy looking, and I'll set up microscopes and just leave them up as demos. So neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. The ones that, under a microscope, that don't look grainy are the monocytes and the lymphocytes. Monocytes are, they're there, they're pretty easy to find. But the interesting thing about monocytes is they are able to sort of change their function. They actually change their name. When you see a cell in the blood, it's called a monocyte. But these cells can actually squeeze through the holes in our capillary bed, enter a site of injury like a cut or an infection, and become a very active, destroying cell. But they change their name. They go from monocytes to macrophages. They're the same cell, but when they're found in the peripheral tissues, we call them macrophages. Obviously, you're not going to see a microscope picture of a macrophage, so what you'll see are monocytes. But they're relatively common. most common, are called lymphocytes. And lymphocytes are very small. They're about the size of a red blood cell. They have a very large nucleus in them. And these guys, that's just what I finished talking about today in micro, these are the cells which are responsible for immunity. They're divided into two groups, T cells and B cells, and that's all you need to know about them. But they're involved in secretion of antibody and fighting off specific infections in our body. So there's 5 cells, the neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes are the 5 white blood cells. Okay, and you're responsible for being able to tell them what they are on a microscope slide on a test. But I'll find it for you. And just leave them set. Okay, so this is I don't think oh, I do have pictures. I forgot I have pictures. Well, these are red blood cells. And this big giant thing here with the big lobe nucleus is a neutrophil. And you see it's kind of grainy looking. Right? But neutrophils are really numerous and they're really easy to tell because they got this very distinctive looking nucleus. Real simple. You'll have trouble with that. This guy here is an eosinophil. Eosinophils, they're grainy looking. Their cytoplasm is kind of pinkish looking. But they very often have a nucleus that looks like a little dumbbell. It's got like 2 little round parts to it. This is the eosinophil. This little guy with the dark blue grains in it is a basophil, and they're hard to find. These little granules contain histone. It's a basophil. This big giant cell with a C-shaped nucleus is a monocyte. Monocytes are the biggest of the white blood cells, and the nucleus is very often shaped like a C. Now, it can be a backward C. Now, it can be the other direction, but it tends to be shaped like a C. And the little guy here got about exactly the same size as a red blood cell, but has a big, huge nucleus in it. That's a lymphocyte. And they're real common. They're easy to find. So those are the 5 kinds of white blood cells. And lastly here, platelets. Platelets are formed from a bigger cell called a megakaryocyte. They last in the body within 12 days. But this term, platelets are involved in hemostasis, which means clotting. You get this in physiology. I don't go into the clotting reaction. You know, the fibrin and the fibrinogen and all that kind of stuff and everything that goes into it. But I want you to remember the platelets are involved in the clotting reaction. And it's called hemostasis. And if you work in a hospital, I'm sure you've seen stuff like, oh yeah, this patient needed platelets. I was wondering why that was. Oh, for clotting. Yeah. That was just a picture. This is a thing called a megakaryocyte, and these are the little fragments of it that kind of break off and form platelets. By the way, there's this huge thing in your book. My textbooks. They seem to be missing a book here. Oh, here we go. That's what I did for not locking right there. I want to find this picture for you. Because somebody's going to ask me about